Religion, Reform, and Renaissance in antebellum America. Religion was a very major part of society during this time period due to the Second Great Awakening. This time, it was more about the goodness of God and how all can share His glory. Only one needed to believe in God to be saved. And this ideal spread throughout America, which sparked competitions between the sects of the church, such as deism, which was based on the idea of clockwork universe. God created the world and the laws that govern it, but He allows the man to govern their own life. He has very little interference with anything in this world, and because of this, it was not very popular because it attacked organized religions, especially Calvinism, even with people such as Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and other very important people believing it. On the topic of Calvinism, Calvinism made a huge rise during this time. Calvinism was based on infant damnation, meaning from the time you were born, you were damned to go to hell. And only a very few elected amount of people were chosen to be saved. The Episcopal Church got started during this time, which was associated with the Church of England. Presbyterian Church got started during this time, which was basically made up of the Irish and the Scots. Another major topic during this time that people discuss is social reforms. That being education, mentally ill, prison reform, schools for the deaf. Dorothea Dix's major contribution was for the mentally and physically impaired. She built hospitals, schools, and dedicated her whole life to the mentally ill. Horace Mann dedicated his life to education. He is known as the father of education because he introduced public education requiring that children attend school through 6th grade. Temperance was another issue that came up during this time. It is the greatest religiously inspired reform. In the 1800s, more people drank alcohol than they do now. It is said 2 to 3 times more people drink alcohol than they do now. It was argued that crime at all levels was rooted in alcohol. In 1826, the assault on the demon rum became a national movement. The state of Maine was the first to prohibit the sale of alcohol in 1851. About a dozen other states followed this lead and passed what they call Maine laws. Most of these states didn't enforce the laws or quickly repealed them. Another controversial topic that happened during this time was women's rights reform. Women were encouraged to learn, so Catherine Beecher Stowe encouraged women to teach. By 1850, most elementary school teachers were women. Emma Willard, in 1821, founded the first female seminary, Troy Female Seminary in New York. Oberlin College in Ohio was the first institution of higher learning to admit blacks and women. This occurred in 1837. Many women played a role in the spirit of the Reform era, especially in temperance and of abolition. This era began the quest for equality between the sexes. However, this won't happen until decades later. But one major thing that the women's did was the Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848, where 300 delegates adopted the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolution. This was the first women's rights convention in the U.S. The document had the same structure of the Declaration of Independence, listed grievances, and called for a redress of these grievances. They demanded the right to vote for women. 34 men signed as well, but some would later request that their names be removed. They launched the women's rights campaign in America. Susan B. Anthony took the leading role in this fight for equality. Some states slowly gave rights. Mississippi was the first state to grant property rights to married women. All in all, they did not accomplish what they wanted to, but it was a great first step in the direction they were heading. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a transcendentalistic writer during this time. He preached a philosophy of the oversoul and ever-changing universe. He preached individualism, optimism, and freedom. His beliefs led him to become an abolitionist, and women's rights supporter. Henry David Thoreau was a student of Emerson. He preached individualism and nonconformity. Walden, A Life in the Woods, and Civil Disobedience were two of his works. He was against the war with Mexico and Texas, joining as a slave state. His ideas of a passive resistance will be emulated by Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Utopian societies were on the rise during this time. They were early forms of socialism. New Harmony in Indiana was founded by Robert Owen. They perished early because they had a lack of harmony among most of their participants. Brook Farm in Massachusetts was a very wealthy society and was shared equally. Resulting in that was a lack of incentive work and eventually led to their demise. Shaker communities advocated strict sexual abstinences. There were 20 by 1830, 6,000 by 1840. These groups will exist for 100 years, dwindling slowly. Oneida was another utopian society. They were manufacturers of silverware. They practiced free love, birth control, and a eugenic selection of parents, which caused problems with neighboring groups. The most well-known utopian society that was created was probably the Mormons, founded by Joseph Smith in New York in 1830. Today is known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because of their beliefs, they were forced to move from New York through various states and eventually to Utah. Brigham Young led them to Salt Lake City, where they developed and grew. They became a major but not understood religion. Utah became a state in 1896. Their admittance had been delayed by the issue of polygamy. And lastly, the Romantic movement was another major thing that happened during this time. It expressed the European and American ideas that there's more than just material things to life. They wanted balanced reason. It is a reaction to the age of reason's strict focus on only reason. Poets, authors, and other writers took those ideas and giving importance to the soul as well as reason. They revered nature, believing in the contemplation of natural scenes that led to discovery of fundamental truths. Territorial expansion and manifest destiny. The California Gold Rush. In January 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. An estimated 100,000 49ers went to the gold fields the following year. There was also a massive influx of Chinese immigrants. The Chinese Exclusion Act will be later passed to keep them out. San Francisco grew from 1,000 to 20,000 almost overnight. The majority of these prospectors were women. Most returned home poorer than they had started out. The annexation of Texas. The reason that this topic was so controversial was due to the fact that that Texas was in the southern part of the United States, and that most of the settlers coming in were predominantly slave owners. From March of 1836 until 1844, the annexation of Texas was a very big deal because they wanted to be part of the United States. President John Tyler campaigned for the annexation of Texas, but he knew that it would take a 2/3 Senate vote to ratify the treaty. He knew that he never could get the 2/3, so he sought a joint resolution of annexation from Congress. A joint resolution is passed by a simple majority in both the House and the Senate and has the force of a law. Tyler received the resolution and annexed Texas on the 4th of July in 1844. Texas will be officially admitted to the Union in December of 1845 under President James K. Polk. 5440 or Fight was a slogan referring to the 54 degrees 40-minute northern border of Oregon by President James Polk. In his first annual address to Congress, he asserted that the U.S. had a claim to the entire Oregon country. He began negotiations with Britain. The British refused to relinquish any territory north of the Columbia River, but they began to adjust their position, for example, by moving their chief fur trade to Vancouver Island, well above the Columbia River. The British Prime Minister suggested moving the boundary from the Rockies at the 49th parallel. President Polk accepted the British proposal, knowing that he would never have gotten the entire territory. The Mexican-American War. In 1846, President Polk sat down with his cabinet on a Saturday and suggested that the U.S. had ample cause for war. That evening, Polk got news that fighting had commenced along the Rio Grande. On the following Monday, Polk declared that Mexico had invaded American territory and shed American blood on American soil. Congress passed a war resolution and authorized 50,000 volunteers. The Mexican-American War was an all-out battle. Old Rough and Ready was a nickname for Zachary Taylor. He crossed the Rio Grande and defeated a numerically superior Mexican force. Battles of Palo Alto de la Palma. He advanced to Monterrey, where he engaged in house-to-house fighting. The Mexican army was ready to surrender early in the war. Polk told Taylor to stand down and take a defensive position. Polk was worried that Taylor was stealing his popularity. The Battle of Buena Vista in February 1847 was another important battle. Taylor defeated Santa Anna and returned home as a military hero. Polk pulled Taylor out of Mexico because of this popularity. Mexico could have been easily conquered, but Polk stopped it, as he wanted California. The Bear Flag Revolt in June of 1846 was the reason why the U.S. was able to conquer California. Aided by John Fremont, who will be the first Republican Party presidential candidate, they defeated the Mexican forces and entered Los Angeles in 1847. As a result of this battle, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was drafted in February 2nd, 1848. Mexico recognized the annexation of Texas with the Rio Grande as a border, ceded the Mexican cession to the U.S., which included Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, and New Mexico, basically most of the Southwest. The U.S. paid $15 million plus $3.3 million in land disputes, whereas Slidell had offered $30 million. In terms of percentage of... Well, that's all, folks.